Hello, this is Neely Hicks with the Women Arise podcast, and I'm really excited for you to meet someone special today. Her name is Jody Anderson, and she originally was in Pennsylvania and became a part of the Eastern Pennsylvania United Methodist Church, where she did amazing ministry. And so she just led a domestic violence conference this last weekend that I was a part of. And when I heard more about her stories, I thought, this is too good to just keep to myself. So, Jody, I want to welcome you today. How are you?
I'm good, Neely. Thank you for having me. I
Good. I'm so
appreciate
glad
it.
you're here.
Thank you.
So, you are going to get to know Jody, and there's so many different layers to Jody. There's the social worker, there's the really faith filled Jody that really flows throughout all of her life. She has so many different experiences. And because this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we're going to focus on her work in that field, specifically as it pertains to children. Um, so, Jody, I know that 9/11 had a huge impact on your life. Can you share more about that?
Sure, Neely. I was on 9/11 when the planes hit the towers. I was working in a rehabilitation program for teenagers and children in Philadelphia. After 9/11 hit and it was time to go home, I could not get home because all transportation was shut down, roads were blocked. It took me to the next day to get home, and I had a son that was 13 years old at home, and I needed to get home to him to make sure that he was safe. We lived outside of Philadelphia at that time, so thank goodness my parents picked him up and he was safe and everything, and I finally got home. But I thought I need to make some changes in my life to make sure that he's a priority. So that's when I decided to move to get a job somewhere. We had friends out in California, and they said, "Come out here." So I started looking for jobs in California, Nevada, and I got a job at Lake Tahoe, which is in Northern California, on the north part of the lake, as a clinical director for a domestic violence organization, the Women's Service. Um,
Can
and during,
can can we
Go ahead.
pause there?
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to provide some framework to this. In your book, Band of Angels, which is coming out the first week of November and will be available on Amazon for download, it is an e-publication,
Correct.
and you need to look at Jody Anderson, The Band of Angels, for the title. But in The Band of Angels, which you gave me a preview copy of, you spoke about crisis prayer. And I think that was a part of your lead in to getting that job and
Right.
being at this pivotal point in your life where 9/11 was a wake up call, perhaps to deeper living.
Right.
And so can you share about that crisis prayer?
Sure. I was a crisis prayer. I wasn't, God and I were on the outs, and I was looking at different religions and things like that. But I had been confirmed Methodist in the church that I'm back at now, and had explored different religions, and there was still this hole in me. So every once in a while, when I needed something, I would crisis prayer. And that was just, if I needed something, I would pray to God that He would be there and that He would give me what I wanted.
All of us
It
have
sounds
done that
silly,
and
doesn't
still
it?
do
But I'm
it.
sure many people do that. Um, and that was before I got into my relationship with Jesus. Um, I had been in youth groups where I accepted Christ as my Savior, but I went away to college and drugs and alcohol took over, and different things like that, and going out and partying a lot. And I had fallen away from God and explored different religions. I had explored Buddhism, I had explored Hinduism, I had explored Mormonism, I had explored. When I went to California, I was following a channeler who channeled an entity named Abraham, or so. That was the name, his real name. In the book, I call him Isaiah because I changed names in the book. Um, so that's where I was when I crisis prayed to God. God, my life is a mess. I need to get something that focuses on my son. What do you have to offer me? Kind of bargaining with God in there. And my friend said, "Come out to
Updating your LinkedIn profile.
yeah, yeah." Um, my friend said, come out to California with us." So I started looking in the papers or in online for jobs, and jobs were so hard to get in California. And this was right after 9/11, and I got a call. I applied for this domestic violence organization, and my background in social work was at the psychiatric hospital where we had some domestic violence cases, and as a task force for violence in our community. That was it. And I had the interview, and lo and behold, I got this job at the most beautiful place in the country, Lake Tahoe. And as we went out there, we drove across country, and I continued crisis praying because I didn't realize that cross country driving was a cross country driving. You know, we were up and down mountains, we were across plains, and every night was a crisis prayer. Oh Lord, just get me through the next day, and I'll come to church. You know, bargaining. Um, so we finally got there, and our last mountain that we had to go up was, I just made a mistake. I made a mistake. God, why did you let me make this mistake? And we got to it, and it was beautiful. And I thought, well, maybe it wasn't a mistake, you know. So that's how I got to North Lake Tahoe. Our home was I worked in California, but our home was in Nevada. It's right on the border. Lake Tahoe, where I lived, was right on the border. And we lived at 6,000 feet. And I went outside one night and looked up at the sky, and you could just see a clear sky and all these stars. And that's when I started having my crisis of faith, of thinking, maybe there is something to this God. Maybe I shouldn't be on the outs with him. So that's my background of how I got there.
So that was really interesting how, like, you were in crisis, you prayed, you did legwork in looking for jobs, and you had a supportive network out there, and you landed this really important position as director. Um, and so tell us more about, like, what were your plans going in? First of all, let's back up and say, who was it specifically that you were going to be working with in that new facility?
The Women's Service served survivors of victims and survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence and child abuse. So it was the big three out there. Lake Tahoe is a ski area in the winter and a boating area in the summer. So there were a lot of transients coming through in the winter, leaving in the summer. Sexual assault was rapid, domestic violence was rapid, and child abuse, being children of um, domestic violence victims, they were automatically affected by that. Um, so that's what I was in charge of. I was in charge of our legal program, our residential program. We had a safe house. I was in charge of our walk-in program for people who needed to support. I was in charge of our groups, and we got a grant for child abuse treatment. So, and I was in charge of writing some grants too. So
Yeah, so you wore many hats
I wore many
there.
hats. Yeah,
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 Lake
but it was a
Tahoe.
great job.
So, if we have anyone listening today who is suffering from domestic violence, what would you share to them directly?
I would share that it's important to have a support system, first of all. Um, and most women, or victims of domestic violence, I should say, because there are male victims of domestic violence, try to leave 7 times before they actually do it. So if you do try to leave and you don't succeed at it, Um, don't beat up on yourself. Just remember there may be another opportunity coming. Um, the other thing that is important, as I said, is building a support system so that when you do decide to leave, you have people to support you and help you. Memorize the number of the domestic violence hotline so that if you need help, you can get it. And
Yes.
don't be afraid to talk about it with your doctor or with your friends.
Yes. Yes. The domestic violence event that went on last weekend that Jody was in charge of was it. There were so many wonderful insights from people who had successfully left an abusive
Yes.
relationship and household. And those videos will also be out soon. And so we'll be sharing those. Um, Many insights to learn. And one of them was in that supportive network, it was also talked about how churches can be a supportive network. Not all churches can be. There's still a lot of like mixed messages that we can get from church in terms of relationships and um, but I would say for the most part, you're going to find people who care about you and want you to be safe. And so just look, you might really have to look for your supportive network and don't be afraid. It's out there. It's out there.
Right.
So Jody, you began working with children there,
I
and
did.
we want to hear more about that.
We had one of the things that we found is that we had offered a group for women um, who were victims of domestic violence and to build their support systems. And what we found is that the women had children, of course, and um, they would bring their children to group. And it wasn't really kosher to have the children in the same group as the parents because they were going to be talking about different things that children really shouldn't be hearing. So what we did is we started a group called Kids Place for the children. And what that small group did was they had coloring activities, they had play activities, they played games, and they started to identify their emotions through games. And that was key um, to helping them survive in the situation. What we thought, though, was that it was important to have something after that. What happens once they identify their emotions and go back into this abusive environment? Is it going to put them more at risk? So we started a group therapy um, group for children ages 5 to 8. And at that time, group therapy for children ages 5 to 8 was almost unheard of because it was mostly individual therapy and play therapy were very popular at the time. I, by training, am a Gestalt therapist and a child trauma specialist. So, so that was my bent on the group. Go ahead.
I have a question about that because probably most of the audience doesn't know what Gestalt therapy
Mm.
is.
Gestalt therapy is a lot of figure ground. Once you're focusing on something, everything else becomes background. For example, if you have to go to the bathroom um, while you're listening to me talk, I'm focused. I'm ground, or I'm figure. I'm sorry. Um, but once you have to go to the bathroom, I become background, and that need to go to the bathroom becomes foreground. That becomes most important. Um, so what you have to do is get up, go to the bathroom, and come back, and then you can pay attention to us talking again, um, and that becomes figure again. Now, in domestic violence, figure is what's going on in the household, walking on eggshells, worrying about what you're going to serve for supper. Is it going to please the perpetrator? Are the children going to be safe, or is the perpetrator going to attack them also? That becomes figure. So everything else becomes background. Worrying about the children's school, worrying about where the children are, becomes background because that becomes figure. Once that is solved or resolved, or you're in a safe place, then all this other stuff can become figure, and the domestic violence becomes background. So you can really focus on what's important for you again. Does that make
Mm,
sense?
it does. Thank you so
Okay,
much
good.
for that explanation.
Yeah,
So in doing this work, you had a companion at your side working with you. Can you
I
share a
did.
little bit about Wendy?
Wendy, it was my godsend. I never do a group alone. I always have at least two people in a group. And I've trained many people in group therapy that way also, um, with adults. But this was Wendy's first experience with children in group therapy. Wendy was just calm. She was an AmeriCorps volunteer that we had hired on in this role.
Mm,
Um, she was she loved children. She was good with the children. They loved her, and she kept me grounded. And we became really good friends. And I was very lucky to have somebody like that to run a group with. But if you're running groups, if you're listening to this and are going to be running groups, do not do it alone. Always make sure you have somebody with you that you can trust, that you can just bounce back and forth just by looking at each other or making
mhm,
hand signals or something like that. But that's very important. And she helped me out a couple times in situations where we had disrupted children
mm,
and that type of thing. For example, um, we had one child who was just picking on other kids, not picking on, but like uh, nitpicking on other kids and talking to them and being disruptive in group and things like that. So instead of saying, now stop that, don't do that, like they do in most grade schools and things like that,
mhm.
Wendy got up, moved people around, sat in between the two kids that were chatting with each other, and sent the other kid over to sit by me, and everything worked out. We didn't have to do any negative comments or anything. So she was a godsend for me.
Mm, that's great. And before we went into the Gestalt therapy explanation, you talked about the art and the crayons and
Yes,
those different common activities. I know that you mentioned that one of the ways that you created that environment was limiting the number of resources that you put out on a table to observe the behavior of how they engaged one another in getting what they wanted. Can you talk about that?
sure. Um, it depends on what your goal of the group is. In schools, everybody has their own crayons, everybody has their own scissors, everybody has their own paste. And that's fine for a school setting because you want to maintain discipline and order and things like that. In group therapy, I used a lot of um, art projects to stimulate conversation. But what we did to increase socialization and get the group to know each other is we limited the amount of crayons, we limited the amount of scissors or glue that was on the table so that if somebody was coloring with a red crayon and somebody else needed a red crayon, they would have to ask the person for it. For example, one of the kids needed was looking for blue and said to me, I need a blue crayon. And my redirection was, well, Lily has a blue crayon. Why don't you ask her? And the kid said, well, who's Lily? And I said, she's over there. Why don't you ask her for her blue crayon? And he did. He said, hey, Lily, can I have the blue crayon? She goes, when I'm finished with it, you may have it. Just like a little kid. So that increases socialization. It increased the children getting to know each other, and it increased their relationship. Okay, in a way that was positive instead of negative that they were used to, and it didn't give them any of the negative feedback that they were getting in schools and from friends and things like that because of their behavior.
Mm, that's great. I know I read in your book that you had some interesting experiences when the game hide and seek was played.
Yes, um, we played hide and seek the one the one day, and the story that I'm thinking of now, and I'm not sure if this is the one in my book or not, but we had a little boy who hid under the table and refused to come out. And what it took, he didn't speak any English. We found out after the group started that he didn't speak English. We thought he was just quiet at first. But we found out he didn't speak English. He could understand it, but he couldn't speak it. So we had some other Latina girls in our group, and they would help translate because my Spanish is basically non-existent, and Wendy's was just minimal. So we had Luis who crawled under the table and wouldn't come out, and we couldn't figure out why. And finally, the Latina girls, got him out because it was time to go, and he wanted to go home. But that was an interesting experience, and everybody tried to get him out. And what happened is, in trying to get him out and talking to him and things like that, when we did it as group leaders, he just shied back. But when the kids did it and tried to get him out, he formed a greater bond with them, and he did come out from under the desk. Now, I don't know if I put that in the book or not, or if that's the one that you were thinking of, but yeah, that's
The
what happened.
example and I don't know that I've got the page open to it, but
Okay.
where the child was fearful when someone else disappeared.
Yes. Um, One of the little girls in our group, when her parents fought, they she would take her little brother up into the closet and hide in there. And she never knew from one moment to the other. She couldn't see her mom, and she never knew sometimes until the next morning whether her mom was dead or alive. So when when the other children disappeared and she couldn't find them, she began to panic and started saying, "Are they dead? Are they alive? I just don't know," and started crying. It really caused some conflict in her. So we were able to bring the group back and process that with her and talk about what she was afraid of. And that's when the story came out about her hiding in the closet and not knowing whether her mom was dead or alive when her father began abusing her, the mother. So it was these children were in very intense situations for the most part. And we hit the head right on, and they responded really well. So,
It's powerful. I think, often we don't realize the damage that's being done to children who are living in a domestic violence situation.
yes,
And some people might refer to it as collateral damage, but what it is also is like if it's not treated, if the children don't have people to turn to that they trust and that they can learn new ways of healthy living, then it can become normalized for them so that they might gravitate towards abusive relationships in their lives or even
correct.
become an abuser.
And you could see that with some of the kids in the group. The one child, his name was Ricky. He was a bully at school because that's the role model that he had from his father. Real men pick on other people, and that's what he did. And then with some of the girls, you could see even with the girls, one of the girls was very violent towards her mother and towards her sister, and had gotten that from her father. She was very attached to her father and used that as a role model. Another one of the girls was very, very timid and got picked on a lot at school and just wanted people to like her, so she put up with it. And that was the other side of it, of her being picking up the mother as a role model, the victim as a role model. So yeah, it goes along familiar lines a lot of times.
So, where did you find hope in seeing such pain and suffering every day in your work?
I've learned how to pray a lot. I every night I prayed a prayer for those children every night. And as I said earlier, God and I weren't on the best of terms, but through that prayer, and it turned from crisis praying into a real relationship with Jesus and with God through these kids and through me praying for them, and it increased my faith. And every every time we went from group, there was some little spark of hope from the kids that really gave me hope. Also, I journaled. I made sure that I had a support system. We went out for drinks sometimes. We went out to listen to music. We just went out and had fun. You know,
Yeah.
up at the lake, you can do anything. You can boat. You can go down on the beach. If I got really stressed out, I would take my laptop and a chair and go down to the beach and sit there and work. So, but a support system is key for us also in working with
It
such
really
intense
is.
groups.
In the event last weekend, you also talked about who owns the story, who owns the
Right,
pain. Can you
right.
talk
It's
about that?
sure. It's my opinion that it's okay to hold somebody's feelings for a while. You know, they tell you their feelings. They talk about they tell you the instance. They talk about their feelings, and it's okay to hold that for them for a while and help them look at it. But it is not yours, and you have no right to it. And that's what I kept saying in my head also. I wanted to go up and hug these kids and take them home with me, but that's not their life. And it's not my feelings. It's not my situation. It's not my experience. And I have no right to it. So I can hold it, but there comes a time to give it back to them. And sometimes in dealing with adults, they didn't want it back. So then we needed to do some more work and more examining and things like that until they were ready to take that situation back. But I had no right to it. So when you're working with children, when you're working with adults or whoever, you have no right to those experiences. You can help with them, but you have no right to own them. So that's my philosophy.
Thank you, Jody. So, where did you see those sparks? You mentioned the word sparks of hope within the children.
They started to work with each other, and we hardly had to do anything. For example, if somebody brought something up that was frightening, usually I would say, or Wendy would say, "You must have been really scared." But all of a sudden, the kids started saying that to each other. And they started saying, "Well, that goes on in my house, too. Well, my dad did this. My mom did this." You know, and they started to support each other. And Wendy and I just sat there and looked at each other amazed that these kids were basically running their own group. And that's the hope. I have to get a drink. Hang on.
It's okay.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
That's the hope that comes out of a group, and that's the power of the group. When the group starts to take over and run itself and interact with each other. And these were kids 5 years old to 8 years old. It was amazing.
So
And that's where
young.
I found my hope. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
the the one story with the little girl that I told you about who hid in the closet, um, the group automatically came in and said, "Wow, that must have been really scary." And somebody else said, "Well, my closet was scary. Weren't you afraid to go in the closet?" And Lily said, "No, because that felt safe in there. It was small and nobody was yelling, and it didn't feel like the house was going to fall down." You know, and somebody said, "Wow, you were really brave to go in the closet, especially with your little brother." You know, so just the support that they got. And again, groups are so powerful. So
That's incredible. Jody, I want to thank you so much for giving the time to talk with me. I know that our listeners are going to be blessed by your story. I do want to just say that what people who are surviving domestic violence need the most is a safe person. We're not here to fix each other. Um, we can't treat people as if they're children and take their situation out of their hands. We've got to just be their safe person and evoke from within them the desire to live differently and the perceived strength inside to be able to take steps, knowing that we will be there to support them. Jody, do you have any final words for someone who might be suffering or someone who wants to help others who are suffering?
sure, getting people to a safe place is key. I forgot to mention that we did not take the kids in group unless they were in a safe place because it would have been counterproductive for them to go home and talk about what was in the group. They might have gotten in trouble from the abusing parent. So make sure that people are in a safe place, and that's your key. Support them. Don't nag them to get into a safe place, but let them know that you're there to talk to and you are there to support them.
Thank you. And then for those who see children in their setting, if it's a community-based program, if it's a congregational program, what would you say to potentially Sunday school teachers or those who are working in community children's services?
Step out of the box and really look at what your goal is for the class and use tools that you have to get people talking, to get people engaged with each other and support each other. Because even in congregations like Sunday schools or small groups that protected services are offering, that is key.
Thank you, Jody. Well, we
Thank you,
look
Neely.
forward to purchasing your book on Amazon. Again, the name of the book is The Band of Angels by Jody Anderson, and it will be out the first week of November 2023. Thank you so much, Jody.
Oh, thank you, Neely, for this opportunity.